1 week after the US paused military assistance to Ukraine, including intelligence sharing, Washington says it has changed its mind. The announcement follows talks in Saudi Arabia, where Kyiv said it will back a US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says it's now up to the Kremlin to make a move. He added that if Moscow says no to the proposal, the US would conclude that Russia is the real impediment to peace. US President Donald Trump said he is hopeful Russia will agree to the ceasefire proposal quickly.
Ukraine, ceasefire, just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. I think it's a big difference between the last visit you saw at the Oval Office and this. So that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to wipe out a deal. But I think the ceasefire is very important. If we can get Russia to do it, that'll be great. If we can't, we just keep going on and people are going to get killed, lots of people.
All right, let's get more from DW's Max Zander, who's in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and DW's Grzegorz Szymanowski, who is in our studio in Riga, which is where DW has been operating since Russian authorities closed down DW's Moscow bureau. Max, if I can start with you, what is the reaction, first of all, in Ukraine to this proposed 30-day ceasefire deal?
Right, Anya, I think this came as a huge surprise when news broke from Saudi Arabia that a deal could have been reached and what the deal actually looked like between the U.S. delegation and the Ukrainian delegation there. The Ukrainian foreign minister who was present at the talks called this a milestone. The Ukrainian president, Zelensky, slightly less euphoric, called it a positive approach. But after the fallout at the White House, this meeting was seen by the Ukrainians as an opportunity to fix the relationship with the U.S., to mend fences there. President Zelensky brought his own proposals to Saudi Arabia, including a partial ceasefire deal in the air and in the sea. Now, this deal, 30-day ceasefire across the entire 1,300-kilometer front line, goes a lot further. It's very ambitious. It's going to be very hard to control. And also, we have to remind ourselves, this is not a done deal. This means nothing without the Russians. So there is reason for cautious optimism here.
Grzegorz, what are you hearing in Russia about this deal? What is the feeling there?
Well, Anya, the first reactions from Russia are reserved and skeptical. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said Russia will make its own decisions and not follow the US or Ukraine. And this really shows you that they are not happy with the situation in which they have now to answer to this initiative instead of dictating their own demands. The head of Foreign Affairs Committee in the upper house of the Russian parliament said that any deal will have to be on Moscow's terms and not on Washington's, because in his words, Russia is now stronger on the battlefield and it can dictate its own terms. And this sentiment is even more widely spread in Russian pro-war nationalist circles. Their popular, influential Telegram channels have been blasting the idea of a ceasefire since yesterday evening. They are saying that a ceasefire will help Ukraine regroup, strengthen the front line for the future. So this could prove to be a tough sell for the US in Russia.
Max, if I can ask you, are Ukrainians worried that the Ukrainian delegation might have agreed to more concessions than have maybe been made public?
I mean, that's right. There's a lot of detail that we don't know for obvious reasons. The Americans, in the days leading up to these talks, exerted a lot of pressure onto President Zelensky and the Ukrainian leadership there. And it's true, we don't know exactly what has been discussed in terms of potential surrendering of Ukrainian territory, in terms of what the Ukrainians would be willing to accept as security guarantees. We only heard time and time again the Ukrainians would have to make very, very difficult decisions, and were being asked for very difficult concessions by the Americans. Now, also keep in mind that this is a very early stage of these talks. Essentially, and the Ukrainians also could be taking a tactical approach here, trying to do as what they can to please the Americans, knowing that the Russians likely will not agree to what the Americans are asking them to do.
Max, you used the words earlier, mending fences. I mean, how do people now see Ukraine-US relations? Does it seem like there is a realistic working relationship again between Kyiv and Washington?
Well, I think it's going to take some time for this news to sink in, and we'll have to see how this new relationship carries on, so to say. A really good thing that for Ukraine that came out of these talks is that military aid is going to continue now. So the Americans are going to deliver military aid, weapons, spare parts, and share their intelligence again with the Ukrainians, which is going to make short-term and long-term a huge difference on the battlefield. And they're going to be able to defend themselves as good or as bad as they were before as they were able to before the Americans took the aid away here. But that being said, military aid is very important. But as for their relationship, trust has been broken. The Ukrainians have learned that their strongest supporter from one day to another can do a 180-degree turn. So it will take some time and work to build this trust again if this is what both sides want.
Grzegorz, President Trump says that he is hoping to speak with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, this week. You said earlier that the sense from Moscow is skepticism, it's reserved. How likely is it that Putin will accept what's being laid on the table here, will accept this deal? I mean, what would be in it for him?
Well, as I said, I think that this could be a tough sell. Vladimir Putin's goals in Ukraine are bigger than where the front line is now. And he has spoke many times about the need of a final settlement on Ukraine with the West. And he spoke in the past against ceasing hostilities, against freezing hostilities just temporarily, because he said Ukraine would use this time to rearm, to strengthen itself, which is not in his interest. So Donald Trump will have to convince Putin that either that this deal will follow up soon, or he will have to give something in exchange. And some Russian commentators are now floating this idea that Russia could demand, for example, stopping Western military aid to Ukraine during the ceasefire. But this is really speculation at this point from Russian experts. The Russian government is very tight-lipped. Obviously, so the next 3 days are going to be days of very intensive diplomacy between the US and Russia.
DW correspondents Grzegorz Szymanowski in Riga and Max Zander in Kyiv. Thanks so much to you both.